Humankind has been desperately seeking ways to establish communication with the dearly departed since the dawn of humanity. In this edition of Avatars of the Astral World, we'll take a trip into the world of two different methods: spirit photography and electronic voice phenomenon. Spirit photography is a type of photography whose primary goal is to capture images of ghosts and other spiritual entities, especially in ghost hunting. It dates back to the late 19th century, the end of the American Civil War, and the mid-19th century spiritualism movement contributed significantly to the popularity of spirit photography. Photographers such as William Mumler and William Hope ran thriving businesses taking photos of people with their supposed dead relatives. Both were shown to be frauds, but true believers, such as Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, refused to accept the evidence as proof of a hoax. As cameras became available to the general public, ghost photographs became common due to natural camera artifacts, such as flash-reflecting off-dust particles, a camera strap or hair close to the lens flare, pareidolia, or in modern times, deceptions using smartphone applications that add ghost images to existing photographs. History. The first practical photography, introduced in 1839, used the process called daguerreotype, and spirits were never captured. According to Owen Davies in The Haunted, A Social History of Ghosts, ghost photography started with photographic experimentation using people standing in front of and behind glass windows, or noting that the long exposures required at the time would often result in transparent images when people or animals left the frame during the exposure. In 1856, Sir David Brewster recognized that a photographer could deliberately use these effects to create ghostly pictures. The London Stereoscopic Company decided to use Brewster's idea and created a series of images called The Ghost in the Stereoscope. But it was not until glass plate negatives were used circa 1859, making double images possible, that spirits began regularly appearing in photographs. From the 1860s on, spirit photographers no longer used the long exposures and double images previously used, but instead what looked like cutout faces and bodies from magazines to represent disembodied figures. By the 1880s, as more people owned cameras, spirit photography boomed. It didn't start to decline until the 1920s after skeptics, such as Harry Houdini, tried to counteract spiritualistic fraud. Spirit photographers. An American jewelry engraver and amateur photographer named William Mumler published a photograph of what was purportedly the spirit of his cousin, who had died 12 years earlier. The media sensation that this caused led Mumler to leave engraving and to begin a successful business as a spirit photographic medium, which he set up in New York and Boston, servicing those hoping to find a supernatural connection with relatives killed in the American Civil War. One of Mumler's most famous images is a photograph of Mary Todd Lincoln posed with the purported spirit of her assassinated husband. The apparent spirits that Mumler had captured were double exposures of previous clients from photographic plates that were improperly cleaned. In 1869, Mumler's fraud was discovered and he was charged. He was acquitted, however, despite the evidence provided that one of his so-called spirits was shown to be still alive. P.T. Barnum, who testified against Mumler, was one of his outspoken critics, declaring he was taking advantage of people's grief. Mumler later moved on to doing stock photography. Spirit photography started appearing in England in 1872 from photographer Frederick Hudson's studios. He allegedly gimmicked his camera to hold a pre-exposed image that would move into place when he took his photo. In 1875, Edouard Buget, a French spirit photographer who also had a studio in London, was arrested in Paris and prosecuted for fraud after making a full confession. He simulated spirits by wrapping dolls in gauze and attaching photos of faces onto them. His confession was widely publicized in the French and English press. One of the most famous spirit photographs was taken by Cybele Corbett in 1891. She took a photo of the library at Combermere Abbey in Cheshire, England, in which the faint outline of a man's head, collar, and right arm appeared. The figure was believed to be the ghost of Lord Combermere, who had recently died and was buried when the photo was taken. Because the exposure was 1 hour, skeptics believed someone, possibly a servant, had walked into the room and paused, causing the ghostly outline. William Hope was one of the most famous photographers at the turn of the century. In February 1922, Harry Price from the Society for Psychical Research, a magician named Seymour, Eric J. Dingwall, and William S. Marriott showed Hope as a fraud. They devised a plan where they presented Hope with glass negatives that had secretly been marked with X-rays. The returned plate containing the spirit had no markings. Price wrote his findings in the Journal of the Society for Psychical Research. Despite this proof, prominent spiritualists, such as Arthur Conan Doyle, claimed the report was a part of a conspiracy against Hope. Hope had continued success despite the evidence against him. Paranormal investigator Massimo Polidoro said that the case of William Hope and his followers demonstrates how difficult it can be to convince true believers, even when there is strong evidence of fraud. Other spirit photographers exposed as frauds include David Duguid and Edward Willey. Ronald Pearsall exposed the tricks of spirit photography in his book, The Table Rappers, 1972. Early books. There were several books published defending the possibility of spirit photography. Among the notable books was The Case for Spirit Photography by Arthur Conan Doyle, published in 1922, where Doyle attempted to defend William Hope and his Crew Circle, a well-known spiritualist group of the time. Other spiritualists who authored books supporting spirit photography were Georgiana Houghton, who wrote chronicles of the photographs of spiritual beings and phenomena invisible to the Material Eye 1882, and James Coates, who wrote Photographing the Invisible 1911. Ghost photography. Paranormal investigator Joe Nickell makes a distinction between spirit photography and ghost photography in his book, The Science of Ghosts, Searching for Spirits of the Dead, stating that spirit photography began in studios and eventually included ghosts photographed in seance rooms, whereas ghost photographs were taken in places that were considered haunted. Nickell says, whereas spirit photos were invariably charlatans' productions, ghost photos could either be faked or appear inadvertently, as by reflection, accidental double exposure, or the like. Once portable cameras became available to amateurs towards the end of the 1880s, ghost photos became more frequent. In more modern times, cameras with built-in flashes produced what some believe to be ectoplasm or orbs. Most ghost photos fall into one of two categories. They are either hazy, indistinct shapes that look human or orbs that are usually white and round. Both can easily be purposefully or accidentally created. Modern claims. Photograph anomalies have always been present in photography, but in the 1990s, television shows such as Ghost Hunters claimed the abnormalities represented proof of the afterlife. In his book Investigating Ghosts, The Scientific Search for Spirits, Ben Radford states that most evidence of ghosts in photographs or video is brief, ambiguous anomalies recorded with a low-quality camera or good-quality cameras, sabotaged by low light conditions. Radford believes that with camera technology advancing, especially smartphones, there should be clearer, sharper images of ghosts, but the photos remain low quality and vague. Orbs. According to University of Westminster professor Annette Hill, unusual light sources were often interpreted as ghost lights in spirit photography. Hill says that with the advent of digital photography, the ghost light is reimagined as an orb, and many paranormal-themed websites show pictures containing visual artifacts they refer to as orbs that are claimed and debated as evidence of spirit presence, especially among ghost hunters. However, such common visual artifacts are simply a result of flash photography reflecting light off solid particles, such as dust, pollen, insects, or liquid particles, especially rain or even foreign material within the camera lens. These effects are widespread with modern compact and ultra-compact digital cameras. Fujifilm describes the artifacts as a common photographic problem. Causes for apparent ghost photographs. According to Kenny Biddle and Joe Nickel in their article, "So you have a ghost in your photo," asserting that a particular image must be paranormal, because it is unexplained only constitutes an example of the logical fallacy called arguing from ignorance. They explain that the flash reflecting off a camera strap can produce a bright white strand or a spiraling vortex of spirit energy, depending on the strap's material. Other ghostly images can result from hair strands, jewelry, or flying insects. A flash illuminating a person's breath in cold weather, cigarette smoke, or fog can look like ectoplasmic mist. Long exposures, usually several seconds, can cause ethereal, see-through shapes or line streaks caused by the camera or the object moving during the exposure. Ben Radford, in his book Big, If True, Adventures in Oddity, includes the phenomenon called pareidolia, the tendency for people to see faces or animals in things such as clouds, tree trunks, or food, as an explanation for finding ghosts in photographs. Shadows from trees, uneven surfaces, and reflections of light from water or glass can all make us see faces. He notes that a ghost's elbow or foot is rarely reported. Modern ghost photographs. In 2016, tourist Henry Yeo took a picture of a staircase with a ghostly figure inside the Stanley Hotel in Colorado. The hotel is well known for its apparent hauntings. Several amateur ghost hunters believe the photo to be unexplainable and that a ghost or possibly two ghosts are at the top of the stairs. According to paranormal investigator Kenny Biddle, the ghosts could have been created because the camera was in panorama mode, which takes several seconds and can cause a double image from the more prolonged exposure. Biddle believes that the image represents the same person moving on the stairs. Ben Radford indicates that the way the woman on the stairs is dressed and the location add to the possibility that people will jump to the conclusion that the paranormal is at work. He states, "She seems to be wearing a classic black or dark dress as befits a fancy, well-known hotel. Had she been wearing a yellow blazer and carrying a large Target shopping bag, speculations about her spectral origins would likely have been scuttled." According to Biddle, author Tim Scullion claims that he has taken pictures of ghosts. Biddle explains that Scullion spirits are produced using long exposures showing motion blur, light painting, dust particles catching the light, lens flare, or overlaying blurry faces on a night scene. This overlay was clearly evident due to the lack of image noise where the faces appear compared to the rest of the photo. An old photograph taken in 1900 became popular within the paranormal community after it was posted on the website belfast.co.uk in a history section about old Belfast trades in 2016. The photo shows a group of Ulster girls from a linen factory. There is a mysterious, apparent ghostly hand sitting on the shoulder of one of the girls. The hand does not appear to belong to anyone in the picture. Biddle decided the photo was authentic and provided evidence that someone was most likely removed from the image in his article, The Ghost Hand of 1900 in Skeptical Inquirer. He describes how retouching photos by hand using a retouching desk, cutting out objects and people, then filling them in with pencil or charcoal was not uncommon. On August 18, 2020, a security firm received an alert at a construction site in Birmingham, England. On the monitor appeared the ghostly figure of a lone woman in a white dress walking across the property. The image went viral and appeared in many tabloids such as The Mirror. Adam Lees, the managing director of a security firm who received the alert, stated, "She's leaning forward and seems to be floating, and is holding something in her hands." To me, it looks like she is wearing a wedding dress, like she's waiting to get married. She looks like a ghostly bride." Biddle noted some unusual things with the image. The camera level seemed too low for a security camera. There were no dates or times on the image as would typically be seen from security software, and the image was in color except for the area around the woman. Biddle surmised that the camera was in an infrared night vision mode, and a flash was fired, explaining the overexposure of the figure and the color distortion. Biddle reached out to Stuart Chapman, who had installed a permanent closed-circuit television system above the other system, and had posted 2 screenshots of a girl in a red dress showing it was not a ghost on the property, but a drunken girl and her friend. Ghost camera apps. Smartphone applications that place images of ghosts, aliens, and monsters into actual pictures have been used for pranks, or to fool people into thinking they are actual images of ghosts. The apps are customizable, allowing the user to place the spirit anywhere within a photo, rotate it, adjust its transparency, and erase parts. In 2014, there were over 250 ghost-related applications for Android phones, one of the most popular being GhostCam, spirit photography. This app was used in a hoax that was used to generate publicity. The group named Ghosts of New England Research Society began publishing hoaxed ghost photos as authentic, hoping to promote an episode of Discovery Channel's American Haunting that the group appeared in. The photo showed a ghostly figure in a restaurant. Biddle spotted the forgery on Facebook and noticed that the ghost looked like a well-documented photo called The Madonna of Bachelor's Grove taken by the Ghost Research Society in 1991. It is unclear if the Ghosts of New England Research Society posted the photos knowing they were hoaxes, or if they were fooled by the restaurant owner who sent them the picture. It was determined that the app was using the Madonna of Bachelor's Grove without permission and was removed after this incident. Another app called Ghost Camera Prank was used by a ghost tour group's Facebook page, claiming a client had taken it. Tay Anderson, co-founder of the Facebook page There's a Ghost App for That, found the specific ghost used in the faked photo. Other clues were that the ghost was sharper than the rest of the picture. The ghost was black and white, while the rest of the image was in color, and the ghost was calculated to be about 11 feet tall. As of 2018, the appeal and novelty of the ghost cam apps have begun to wear off, although there are still people who will attempt to pass off the results of these apps as authentic. Pranksters will try to fool their friends or families, but sometimes the prank can go too far when their targets believe the hoax is true. Others, such as the owners of pubs, hotels, or ghost hunting tours, will try to profit from the photos by increasing their clientele or raising prices. We move on to what we hear from what we see. Within ghost hunting and parapsychology, electronic voice phenomena, also known as EVP, are sounds found on electronic recordings interpreted as spirit voices. Parapsychologist Konstantin Zradev, who popularized the idea in the 1970s, described EVP as typically brief, usually the length of a word or short phrase. Enthusiasts consider EVP to be a form of a paranormal phenomenon, often found in recordings with static or other background noise. Scientists regard EVP as auditory pareidolia, interpreting random sounds as voices in one's language, and a pseudoscience promulgated by popular culture. Prosaic explanations for EVP include apophenia perceiving patterns in random information, equipment artifacts, and hoaxes. History. As the spiritualist religious movement became prominent in the 1840s until the 1940s with a distinguishing belief that mediums could contact the spirits of the dead, new technologies of the era, including photography, were employed by spiritualists to demonstrate contact with the spirit world. So popular were such ideas that Thomas Edison was asked in an interview with Scientific American to comment on the possibility of using his inventions to communicate with spirits. He replied that if the spirits were only capable of subtle influences, a sensitive recording device would provide a better chance of spirit communication than the table tipping and Ouija boards mediums employed at the time. However, there is no indication that Edison designed or constructed a device for such a purpose. As sound recording became widespread, mediums explored using this technology to demonstrate communication with the dead. Spiritualism declined in the latter part of the 20th century, but attempts to use portable recording devices and modern digital technologies to communicate with spirits continued. Early interest. American photographer Attila von Scholey was among the first to try recording what he believed to be voices of the dead as a way to augment his investigations in photographing ghosts. He began his attempts in 1941 using a 78 RPM record. Still, it wasn't until 1956, after switching to a reel-to-reel tape recorder, that he believed he was successful. Working with Raymond Bayless, von Scholey conducted several recording sessions with a custom-made apparatus consisting of a microphone in an insulated cabinet connected to an external recording device and speaker. Scholey reported finding many sounds on the tape that could not be heard on the speaker at the time of recording, some of which were recorded when there was no one in the cabinet. He believes these sounds to be the voices of discarnate spirits. Among the first recordings believed to be spirit voices were such messages as "This is G," "Hot Dog," "Art," and "Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to you all." Von Scholey and Raymond Bayless's work was published by the Journal of the American Society for Psychical Research in 1959. Bayless later co-authored the 1979 book, Phone Calls from the Dead. In 1959, Swedish painter and film producer Fredrik Jurgensen was recording bird songs. Upon playing the tape later, he heard what he interpreted to be his dead father's voice, and then the spirit of his deceased wife calling his name. He made several more recordings, including one that he said contained a message from his late mother. Radiv voices. Konstantin Radiv, a Latvian psychologist who had taught at Uppsala University, Sweden, and who had worked in conjunction with Jurgensen, made over 100,000 recordings which he described as being communications with discarnate people. Some of these recordings were conducted in an RF-screened laboratory and contained words Radiv said were identifiable. To confirm the content of his collection of recordings, Radiv invited listeners to hear and interpret them. He believed that the clarity of the voices heard in his recordings implied that they could not be readily explained by normal means. Radiv published his first book, Breakthrough, an amazing experiment in electronic communication with the dead, in 1968, and it was translated into English in 1971. Spiricom and Frank's Box. In 1980, William O'Neill constructed an electronic audio device called the Spiricom. O'Neill claimed the device was built to specifications that he received psychically from George Mueller, a scientist who had died 6 years previously. At a Washington, D.C. press conference on April 6, 1982, O'Neill stated that he could hold two-way conversations with spirits through the Spiricom device, and provided the design specifications to researchers for free. However, nobody knows to have replicated the results O'Neill claimed using his Spiricom devices. O'Neill's partner, retired industrialist George Meek, attributed O'Neill's success and the inability of others to repeat it to O'Neill's mediumistic abilities, forming part of the loop that made the system work. In 2020, Kenny Biddle wrote a comprehensive article explaining the origins of Spiricom as developed by O'Neill and Meek. He was prompted to do so by re-emerging the device on the Ghost Hunters television series. He comprehensively debunked the science behind the device in the initial development and the Ghost Hunters episode. Another electronic device specifically constructed in an attempt to capture EVP is Frank's Box, or the Ghost Box, created in 2002 by EVP enthusiast Frank Sumption for supposed real-time communication with the dead. Sumption claims he received his design instructions from the spirit world. The device is described as a combination white noise generator and an AM radio receiver modified to sweep back and forth through the AM band, selecting split-second snippets of sound. Critics of the device say its effect is subjective and impossible to replicate. Since it relies on radio noise, any meaningful response a user gets is purely coincidental or simply the result of pareidolia. Paranormal researcher Ben Radford writes that Frank's box is a modern version of the Ouija board, also known as the broken radio. In 1982, Sarah Estep founded the American Association of Electronic Voice Phenomena in Severna Park, Maryland, a nonprofit organization to increase awareness of EVP and teach standardized methods for capturing it. Estep began her exploration of EVP in 1976 and said she had made hundreds of recordings of messages from deceased friends, relatives, and extraterrestrials whom she speculated originated from other planets or dimensions. The term instrumental transcommunication, or ITC, was coined by Ernst Sinkowski in the 1970s to refer more generally to communication through electronic devices such as tape recorders, fax machines, television sets, or computers between spirits or other discarnate entities and the living. One particularly famous claimed incident of ITC occurred when the image of EVP enthusiast Friedrich Jurgensen, whose funeral was held that day, was said to have appeared on a television in the home of a colleague who had been purposefully tuned to a vacant channel. ITC enthusiasts also look at the TV and video camera feedback loop of the Drost effect. In 1979, parapsychologist D. Scott Rogo described an alleged paranormal phenomenon in which people report that they receive simple, brief, and usually single-occurrence telephone calls from spirits of deceased relatives, friends, or strangers. Rosemary Gilly wrote, "Within the parapsychology establishment, Rogo was often faulted for poor scholarship, which critics said led to erroneous conclusions." In 1995, the parapsychologist David Fontana proposed in an article that poltergeists could haunt tape recorders. He speculated that this may have happened to parapsychologist Maurice Grosse, who investigated the Enfield poltergeist case. However, Tom Flynn, a media expert for the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry, examined Fontana's article and suggested an entirely naturalistic explanation for the phenomena. According to the skeptical investigator Joe Nickell, occasionally, especially with older tape and under humid conditions, as the tape travels, it can adhere to one of the guide posts. When this happens on a deck where both supply and take-up spindles are powered, the tape continues to feed, creating a fold. It was such a loop of tape, Flynn theorizes, that threaded its way amid the works of Grosse's recorder. In 1997, Amos Barras of the Department of Psychology at the University of Western Ontario conducted a series of experiments using the methods of EVP investigator Konstantin Radiv and the work of instrumental transcommunication researcher Mark Macy as a guide. A radio was tuned to an empty frequency, and over 81 sessions, a total of 60 hours and 11 minutes of recordings were collected. During recordings, a person either sat in silence or attempted to make verbal contact with potential sources of EVP. Barras stated that he did record several events that sounded like voices. Still, they were too few and too random to represent viable data and too open to interpretation to be described definitively as EVP. He concluded, "While we did replicate EVP in the weak sense of finding voices on audio tapes, none of the phenomena found in our study was anomalous, let alone attributable to discarnate beings. Hence, we have failed to replicate EVP in the strong sense." The findings were published in the Journal of Scientific Exploration in 2001 and include a literature review. In 2005, the Journal of the Society for Psychical Research published a report by paranormal investigator Alexander McRae. McRae conducted recording sessions using a device of his design that generated EVP in an attempt to demonstrate that different individuals would interpret EVP in the recordings the same way, McRae asked 7 people to compare some selections to a list of 5 phrases he provided and to choose the best match. McRae said the results of the listening panels indicated that the samples were of paranormal origin. Portable digital voice recorders are the technology of choice for some EVP investigators. Since some of these devices are very susceptible to radio frequency contamination, EVP enthusiasts sometimes try to record EVP in RF and sound-screened rooms. Some EVP enthusiasts describe hearing the words in EVP as an ability, much like learning a new language. Skeptics suggest that the claimed instances may be misinterpretations of natural phenomena, the inadvertent influence of the electronic equipment by researchers, or deliberate influencing of the researchers and the equipment by third parties. EVP and ITC are seldom researched within the scientific community, so most research in the field is carried out by amateur researchers who lack the training and resources to conduct scientific research and are motivated by subjective notions. Explanations and origins. Paranormal claims for the origin of EVP include living humans imprinting thoughts directly on an electronic medium through psychokinesis and communication by discarnate entities, such as spirits, nature energies, beings from other dimensions, or extraterrestrials. Paranormal explanations for EVP generally assume the production of EVP by communicating intelligence through means other than the typical functioning of communication technologies. Natural reasons for reported instances of EVP tend to dispute this assumption explicitly and provide explanations that do not require novel mechanisms that are not based on recognized scientific phenomena. One study by psychologist Aimance Barres could not replicate suggested paranormal origins for EVP recorded under controlled conditions. In Pseudoscience, a critical encyclopedia, Brian Regal wrote, "A case can be made for the idea that many EVPs are artifacts of the recording process itself with which the operators are unfamiliar. Most EVPs have alternative, non-spiritual sources. Anomalous ones have no clear proof they are of spiritual origin. Natural explanations. Several simple scientific explanations can account for why some listeners to the static on audio devices may believe they hear voices, including radio interference and the tendency of the human brain to recognize patterns in random stimuli. Some recordings may be hoaxes created by frauds or pranksters. Psychology and perception. Auditory pareidolia is a situation created when the brain incorrectly interprets random patterns as being familiar patterns. In the case of EVP, it could result in an observer interpreting random noise on an audio recording as the familiar sound of a human voice. The propensity for an unmistakable voice heard in white noise recordings to be in a language understood well by those researching it, rather than in an unfamiliar language, has been cited as evidence of this, and a broad class of phenomena referred to by author Joe Banks as Rorschach audio has been described as a global explanation for all manifestations of EVP. In a 2019 investigation of a supposed haunted painting in a West Virginia museum, paranormal researcher Kenny Biddle investigated the claims made by the museum owner and ghost hunters that an EVP recording clearly saying the woman's name, Annie, is the voice of the woman in the portrait. The name Annie is written on the back of the portrait, which primes anyone listening for the name to know what name to listen for. The EVP was created using a Radio Shack radio, modified to allow it to continually scan through the available AM or FM frequencies without muting the sound. Regarding a general question by the ghost hunter, "What is your name?" Biddle writes, "I can guarantee sooner or later you'll hear something that sounds like a name, and there is a good chance of being a name, because you're listening to radio broadcasts, news reports, commercials, and so on, which often include names." Biddle lists words such as company, anything, anyone, mahogany, many, or even any, as words that can be commonly heard while listening to the radio. The phrase, "and he," would also sound like Annie to anyone primed to listen for the name Annie. Skeptics such as David Federline, Chris French, Terence Hines, and Michael Shermer say that EVP is usually recorded by raising the noise floor, the electrical noise created by all electrical devices, to create white noise. When this noise is filtered, it can be made to produce noises that sound like speech. Federline says this is no different from using a wah pedal on a guitar, a focused sweep filter that moves around the spectrum and creates open vowel sounds. This, according to Federline, sounds precisely like some EVP this, combined with cross-modulation of radio stations or faulty ground loops, can cause the impression of paranormal voices. The human brain evolved to recognize patterns, and if a person listens to enough noise, the brain will detect words, even when there is no intelligent source for them. Expectation is also essential in making people believe they hear voices in random noise. Apophenia is related to but distinct from pareidolia. Apophenia is defined as the spontaneous finding of connections or meaning in things which are random, unconnected, or meaningless, and has been put forward as a possible explanation. According to psychologist James Alcock, what people hear in EVP recordings can best be explained by apophenia, cross-modulation or expectation, and wishful thinking. Alcock concluded, "Electronic voice phenomena are the products of hope and expectation. The claims wither away under the light of scientific scrutiny." Physics. Interference, for example, is seen in EVP recordings, especially those recorded on devices that contain RLC circuits. These cases represent radio signals of voices or other sounds from broadcast sources. Interference from CB radio transmissions and wireless baby monitors, or anomalies generated through cross-modulation from other electronic devices, are all documented phenomena. It is even possible for circuits to resonate without any internal power source using radio reception. Capture errors are anomalies created by the method used to capture audio signals, such as noise generated through the over-amplification of a signal at the point of recording. Artifacts created during attempts to boost the clarity of an existing recording might explain some EVP methods include resampling, frequency isolation, and noise reduction or enhancement, which can cause recordings to take on qualities significantly different from those that were present in the original recording. The first EVP recordings may have originated from tape recording equipment with poorly aligned erasure and recording heads, resulting in the incomplete erasure of previous audio recordings on the tape. This could allow a small percentage of previous content to be superimposed or mixed into a new silent recording. Sporadic meteors and meteor showers. For all radio transmissions above 30 MHz, which are not reflected by the ionosphere, there is a possibility of meteor reflection of the radio signal. Meteors leave a trail of ionized particles and electrons as they pass through the upper atmosphere, a process called ablation, reflecting transmission radio waves that usually flow into space. These reflected waves are from transmitters below the horizon of the received meteor reflection. In Europe, the brief scattered wave may carry a foreign voice which can interfere with radio receivers. Meteor-reflected radio waves last between 0.05 seconds and 1 second, depending on the size of the meteor. Organizations that show interest in EVP. There are several organizations dedicated to studying EVP and instrumental transcommunication, which otherwise express interest in the subject. Individuals within these organizations may participate in investigations, author books or journal articles, deliver presentations, and hold conferences where they share experiences. In addition, organizations that dispute the validity of the phenomena on scientific grounds exist. The Association Transcommunication, also known as a TRANS-C, formerly the American Association of Electronic Voice Phenomena, and the International Ghost Hunters Society conduct ongoing investigations of EVP and ITC, including collecting examples of purported EVP available over the internet. The Rorschach Audio Project, initiated by sound artist Joe Banks, presents EVP as a product of radio interference combined with auditory pareidolia and the Interdisciplinary Laboratory for Biopsycho-Cybernetics Research, a nonprofit organization dedicated to studying anomalous phenomena related to neurophysiological conditions. Parapsychologists and spiritualists have an ongoing interest in EVP. Many spiritualists experiment with various techniques for spirit communication, which they believe provide evidence of the continuation of life. According to the National Spiritualist Association of Churches, an important modern-day development in mediumship is spirit communications via an electronic device. This is most commonly known as electronic voice phenomena. An informal survey by the organization's Department of Phenomenal Evidence cites that 1/3 of churches conduct sessions in which participants seek to communicate with spirit entities using EVP. The James Randi Educational Foundation offered $1 million for proof that any phenomena, including EVP, are caused paranormally. Demographics. In 2015, an investigation by Associate Professor of Sociology Mark Eaton on the demography of United States paranormal groups that used electronic voice phenomenon found an overrepresentation of white participants raised in the Roman Catholic Church, which is only 21% of the U.S. population, mainly with some post-secondary education. Although a preponderance of research shows that women and less socially integrated individuals are more likely to believe in ghosts, the demographic samples in Eaton's investigation did not reflect this. Cultural impact. The concept of EVP has influenced popular culture. It is popular as an entertaining pursuit, as in ghost hunting, and as a means of dealing with grief. It has influenced literature, radio, film, television, and music. Groups. Investigation of EVP is the subject of hundreds of regional and national groups and internet message boards. Paranormal investigator John Zaffis claims, "There's been a boom in ghost hunting ever since the internet took off. Investigators, equipped with electronic gear like EMF meters, video cameras, and audio recorders, scour reportedly haunted venues, trying to uncover visual and audio evidence of ghosts. Many use portable recording devices in an attempt to capture EVP. Will science ever find a way to prove the existence of an afterlife accurately? That's a question we may never know the answer to. Still, that will never stop anyone from asking."